Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence with psychiatrist Bernard David Beitman, MD. Dr. Beitman is the founder of the Coincidence Project. The project encourages people like you to tell each other coincidence stories. To learn more about Dr. Beitman's work, put Connecting with Coincidence in your web browser. You'll find his book, his Psychology Today blog, and the interviews from this podcast. And now your host, Bernard Beitman, MD.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD. Yes, this is CC with BB 2.0. If you wish to support us here at Connecting with Coincidence, please like and subscribe to us. Increasing subscriber numbers increases our reach. And those of you watching us on YouTube, write us one of your coincidence stories in the comments sections. We will reply. Time is on my side. Yes, it is now.
Bom, 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 bom. Oh, that's Money. I was trying to think of Time by Pink Floyd.
Good. Time. That's our musician chiming in on that one. Coincidences often take place within a short time interval. First, the thought, something like, I need some help. And then the event, like the help arrives. Sometimes a minute or an hour or a day or even a week. I just got an email from somebody who was lost and said on a place she'd never been, and the car, she didn't know where to go. And she said, when I go around the corner, I'm going to hope there's going to be an older couple that's going to need a ride to where I'm going. Right around the corner, and there's the couple, and she got the ride, and they were going to where they needed to go.
They were in GPS.
Yes. And that was just right before we were doing this show. So there's a time interval right there for me to have just read about time. And here we go. So we may be grooving here, right? Less often perhaps than in a year. What is time? The usual linear past, present, future, or something more fluid, like all time is right now, or not just now, but eternity in a grain of sand, right here in this grain of sand, that we can move from the past or to the past to change the present, or move to the future to change the present, or somehow change the future, that the future can be seen now. Today, we have a philosopher and a physicist who will venture out into a dialogue about the nature of time.
Is it time yet?
No, I'm just going to introduce the two of you. I just had to get my paper up here. Alessandra Melas collaborates with the University of Sassari in Sardinia, Italy. Sardinia is halfway between Italy and Spain, out in the Mediterranean, and a different world unto itself. It has 130 different types of bread, just in case you're interested, where she defended a Ph.D. dissertation concerning causal realism in quantum mechanics. Her research focuses on history and metaphysics of science, with particular interest in causation, causal models, and chance. She is currently working on metaphysics of coincidences. Yes, she has also been a teacher of history and philosophy in the local high school for almost a decade. Sky Nelson Isaacs is a physicist, musician, and author of two books: One Leap to Wholeness, How the World is Programmed to Help Us Grow, Heal, and Adapt, and his first book, Living in Flow, The Science of Synchronicity and How Your Choices Shape Your World. Over the past decade, he has contributed research to the foundation of quantum mechanics. His most recent research has been published in the scientific journal Quantum Reports. He seeks to connect synchronicity, physics, and living in a state of flow using original research and original ideas. Welcome to the show, Sky. Welcome to the show, Alessandra.
Hi, Alessandra. Good to meet you.
The way we began this is they had never spoken with each other, and each of them loved time. And one's a physicist, one's a philosopher, and physics has a philosophy, and philosophy has, the way Alessandra's doing, some physics in it for sure. So this is a unique opportunity for these two people, each of whom are coincidence ambassadors, who want to talk about time. And they're going to be talking about time. So I now leave it to Sky and Alessandra. Where are we going this time?
So Alessandra, I was curious, hearing about your PhD dissertation, which I think is, not directly applicable to coincidences, but you studied EPR, Bohm, and a connection between EPR and
Define
special
EPR.
relativity.
Define EPR.
EPR is Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paper, academic paper that was written in 1932, I think, to illustrate that quantum entanglement would be a thing, and trying to show that it would be a kind of a ridiculous conclusion, but indeed it was very prescient for what's really the case, that systems can be entangled over large distances, and that's a very quantum mechanical phenomenon. But Alessandra's paper in her dissertation was connecting that to special relativity and space-time diagrams and this fork model. So, and I think it's sort of tangential to the conversation on coincidences, but I think related to the conversation on time. And so I was just curious about your experience in your dissertation and that research. What brought you to that research?
Yeah, so you already said what is the main topic is in Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paper, where in fact they said that so if quantum mechanics is a complete theory, so then it's a ridiculous in some sense theory, because it has some ridiculous conclusions. Such as, for example, that reality must be non-local, or there must be some sort of non-local correlations between some properties or some particles which are far away each other.
And the important thing there is that word non-local, and I want to make sure.
Non-local, it means that non-local means in this case that you can have a passage of signal, okay, simultaneously, violating the special relativity, or according to which it is not possible to go more fast than the speed of light. Okay, so if you admit that there is some kind of a simultaneous correlation between particles or systems which are far away in some sense, you are going in a violation of special relativity, Einstein's special relativity.
Or just what we think of as regular reality too. I mean, it's still life, but we don't think of things far away from each other being able to respond to each other simultaneously. That's just,
yeah.
And one of the things that I love about Bohm's work
of physical laws.
Yeah.
That's, what I have tried to do with the paper I have written and my PhD dissertation is to find a local causal model which can explain these kind of correlations without violating special relativity principle.
That is so very important.
It was a really hard work.
Yeah, you're trying to say, no, it's this non-local doesn't have to be looked as non-local. Sky, you were going to say something there.
Well, one of the things I love about Bohm's approach is the notion of wholeness. And so in the model that I'm essentially trying to continue Bohm's work, which was started by him in the 70s and earlier. And this is the notion, the relationship between all and one, or holism. And the fundamental mathematics there is the frequency domain, this notion of there's a space-time domain, which is like Minkowski space or just the regular physical world. But in quantum mechanics, there's this alternate domain, or it's actually true in all of science. In image processing, we can take a photograph of your screenshot right here, and we can write it in the frequency domain, which is highlighting all the patterns in the picture. And This is what people do in graphic design all the time. You can filter your images with, like in Snapchat, you can have these strange filters which modify the whole image, or change the sound. My daughter loves to take my phone and record her voice, and then it plays back at this really high pitched, very alien sounding voice. And that's all done using this thing called the Fourier domain, the frequency domain, which is a timeless and spaceless representation of our physical world. And so I think what Bohm was trying to get at, and what my work does with time, is show that there's this timeless and spaceless realm in which there's, in some sense, instantaneous connection. I mean, when you get rid of time, the whole word instantaneous doesn't even make any sense anymore, because that refers to time, things being aligned in time. And so this is the direction I approach synchronicity from, that if we're talking about a timeless tree of all the possible states, then it would make sense that there's some sense in which there's correlations across time, because there's no tracking of time to begin with.
Could you please explain the frequency domain and the not having time in it? Because I think that's a very, very important concept.
Yeah. So like, for instance, if you've listened to music on your computer or device, you're probably listening to an MP3 file, which is a special type of file. And what's special about an MP3 is it's much smaller in size than the original file of music. So sound comes in the form of sound waves in air, and it gets recorded into like a wave file. And that file is much bigger, like 40 megabytes. But what we can do is we can convert it from a time-based signal into a frequency-based signal. It's the same information, same data, exact same file size, but it's this alternate representation. And that, instead of being arranged from beginning to end, the information is arranged from low frequency to high frequency. So if I was to modify like the one side of the file, the beginning of the file, I would be increasing or decreasing the low frequencies, the really bassy tones. And if I was to modify the high, the end of the file, rather than being the end of the song, it would be the high frequency tones. And I might make my Snapchat voice really strange, So I've got this modification of, it's essentially a graphic equalizer. The frequency domain is a graphic equalizer.
That's pretty amazing. Alessandra, what do you have to say about that?
So I have a question for Pascal. So are you saying that to do that, you don't need time? So are you working without time? So
yeah. And you couldn't play that back because there's no time ordering. The time ordering is actually still there. It's encoded into the file, into the phase of the relationships of the waves, but it's not explicit. And this is really Bohm's idea of the explicit and implicate order.
Yeah.
Time becomes implicate in this way.
Yeah, this is incredible. So congratulations.
So this, holism.
This is new information to you, Alessandra. Yeah. How time it becomes implicit rather than explicit. It's still there, and I'm glad you asked that question, because we have to. It still seems to go from beginning to end somehow. So that's a time thing, but then making it implicit so it's not there becomes a little bit of a head scratcher. But it's getting into the right direction. I want to keep this. But I want to see if we can relate that to what Alessandra, you're shaking your head too. We'll come back to it. Yeah. But maybe we can get partly to that, because your work has been getting so that we don't have to think of local, non-local as the way everything is. Because what Sky is describing is something that's not the way we think of things as being, and that with time not around. And now you're talking about, from a more quantum physics capacity, that we don't have to think of everything as non-local, which I'm getting tired of people saying it's all non-local. There is something else going on here. I can touch my.
I'm sorry you don't like non-locality, Bernie.
Now I have a question, which is
it's all non-local. That is my problem. Not that it doesn't. we don't have this thing going on, but everything's non-local. Alessandra?
Yeah, everything is no local. So, but if everything is no local, like in a big, I don't know, soup, okay, floating in a big soup. So everything is in a net, so connected, interconnected. And so the question is, if everything is connected, okay, with the other things, with the whole and the wall, then how can we make a distinction between what is a coincidence and what it is not a coincidence? So do you know,
Yes.
do you understand what I am asking? So
Yes.
we choose that something it's a coincidence and something it is not a coincidence. So
do
how
you think of,
do we choose if everything is connected in a big net, like in a bombs word or
Right.
wall?
right? Do you think that there's a distinction between coincidental events and non-coincidental events, or is it like a gradual spectrum?
Okay. So you think there is a kind of degree, so
Yeah.
something which is more coincidental than something else. So you say that something is a more coincidence than another.
Right. Yeah, I think
Incidence.
people really try to distinguish, well, was that a coincidence or not? And I think that's kind of a meaningless question. It's more about like, what is the, first of all, like, what is the meaning of this situation, and what is the meaning to me? I think it's very personal, because I had a dream 2 nights ago about something like this. Nobody else knows about that dream, but to me, this situation that I'm experiencing right now suddenly clicks into place because I realize, my thinking about how to approach this conversation around my job reflects what I had in the dream last 2 nights ago. And then this person just mentioned that right now, and it all clicks, but it's only for me. And so I wouldn't go and like register in the coincidence journal for the
Coincidence
world.
book.
Yeah, exactly. It's a scale of.
I agree with you. Yes, with this point, in this point, I agree with you. So the relevance we gave to facts or things in general helps us to single out some particular events and put them together in a coincidence, in a meaningful relation.
Mhm.
So we choose the meaning which is relating some particular events. Okay, but I agree with you only partially, because I think this is true for the case of synchronicity. Okay, when you have only a matching in time, in some sense. Okay, but think about the case of what I can call, let's say, physical coincidences. The case in which we have some physical processes interacting each other in space and in time, like in the famous, very popular example, which the Nobel Prize Jacques Monod gave us in Les hasards et la nécessité, Chance and Necessity, in his book. In this example, we have a doctor who is going to visit his patient or her patient for the first time. In the meanwhile, there is a guy who is fixing a roof in the same area. And the hammer of this guy falls down and beat doctor's head, and the doctor died. So dies. Okay. This is a tragic coincidence. Oh, what a coincidence! What a bad luck, actually. Also, okay. In Italy, we say "che sfiga," such a very che sfiga, such a very bad luck.
I love that. That's like Murphy's Law here.
This is really, I think you can write it in a book, in a coincidence book. Okay.
Right.
So this is a coincidence for me, for you, for Bernie, and I think for many people. Okay. The guy who died cannot say anything about that, but everybody could agree with this. So
Okay.
if we think about the case of synchronicity, you and me, so we are right. Okay, we are right. But it's important the selection we do. But in more physical kinds of coincidences, the meaning, the relation in the meaning of the two involved, in this case are two involved events, is not so important. I think we should make a distinction between different kinds of coincidences, or at least the incidences.
So I have a story that Bernie asked me to come up with from my last weekend. That maybe, should I tell that story, Bernie, and then we can sort of analyze it in terms of what Alessandra is saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so my wife has been planning to attend her friend's wedding from college that happened in Oregon last week. And so we took a road trip up to Oregon and went to this beautiful wedding and felt very blessed to be there. And she's known this person since college, and I've known my wife since before that. So I've also known this person since college. And we're in the wedding and we're dancing afterwards. And there's this person there, this man that I was interested in like saying hi to, because he seemed like gregarious and, we had some similarities, and but I never got around to connecting with him, and he always seemed busy talking. And so I just didn't bother with it. And finally, at the end of the night, I started a conversation with him on the dance floor, and we're talking. He's into philosophy. He's actually teaches gratitude. He trains people and kids in gratitude to create a better world and more peaceful society through gratitude experiences. And I mentioned that I do this research on synchronicity, and I've got a book called Living in Flow. And he says, "Oh, that's funny, because I met this physicist down in Claremont 2 years ago when I was meeting Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and you're familiar with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. And so I met this physicist who I bought his book on flow called Living in Flow. But I had short hair then, and there was no reason why we would expect to have known each other down in Claremont, California, when we were meeting up in Oregon. But it turns out that I was at that conference too, because that's where I got to meet Csikszentmihalyi, and we knew each other. We had met and had a conversation, and I had sold him a copy of my book, but he was best friends with my wife's best friend, and we didn't realize that until the very end of the wedding, that there was this connection, that we already knew each other.
Wow.
So that's like a synchronicity in,
yeah.
It's got elements of space and time, right? Is that what you would say? Because we're in the same, we met in a place that was aligned previously 2 years ago, and then we had to meet again 2 years later in space.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so there is not. We met at the same time. You met at the same time during the wedding, but your first meeting was in another time.
Yeah.
So there is not a perfect match in time. Absolutely.
No.
Yeah, and also I think there is not a perfect match in space, because the two spaces were different. So the space of the wedding, the city of the wedding,
Right.
and the city of the conference.
Right.
Right. But it's
multiple spaces and multiple times.
But it is still a coincidence.
And
yeah,
I'd
say, interesting example.
I'd say that the space was somehow more closely relevant, because they met in the same space.
Right.
It started from before, so I would distinguish time of 2 years, and that's what I want to get to with both of you. And space, 2 years, but they met in one space. So it's not like they met on the internet and in space where they weren't in the same place. They met in the same place. So I'll put, okay. We'll
you're
go with
right.
that.
So the space is the same, different times, but same space.
Same space. That's where I'd rather look at it this way, although I see what you're talking about before. And where we started off, and Sky, you were talking about falling together in time, synchronicity. This is one of those. Synchronicity is together and Chron in time. In German, it's zufallen. and Sufallen means it falls on you. It's just the little
like the hammer.
Like a hammer, like the hammer,
Yeah.
just kind of hits you with it. It falls to you. Here we have a 2-year difference. This is not fitting the general definition of synchronicity from which it came, time falling together in time. And this 2-year thing is a true, I mean, it happens. It's it's another form of coincidences. But here we have, for our discussion of time, I put to both of you the idea of the falling together in time in a short period of time, like the story I told at the beginning, where the person needed some help and there it was. So that was a short period of time. But this is 2 years. So
Yeah.
please,
Sorry, Bernie, I have a story which is in some sense quite similar to
Yeah, I want to hear
the
that.
coincidence story. So,
go ahead.
where there is a difference of 10 years in time. So, and in some sense is quite similar. So a few years ago, I was in Prague for a vacation with a good friend of mine. After having unpackaged the luggage, we decided to go out to visit the city. After walking for miles, I've got tired, and I decided to sit in one of the 1 million benches that are in Prague. And my friend took a photo of me sitting in that bench. When I went back home, I showed this picture to my mom, who said, "Oh, wow, this is quite similar to a picture which your dad took of me sitting in a bench in Prague." And she searched, she looked for that photograph, and we were shocked because the bench was exactly the same after 10 years. Okay, so I was photographed in the same bench as my mom, okay, in Prague, 10 years later.
Wow. Wow.
And this is a true story. I can show you the picture.
And time.
I can show you the picture.
Yeah, space and
very similar to Sky's story.
yes. And so I want to pause because I'm so meta sometimes. Here we have each of you talking about similar coincidences, which is the part of the fun of why I want to ask people to tell.
Coincidence.
That's a coincidence. I want to be able to have people tell their coincidence stories, because this is the sort of thing that happens. You, Sky, reminded Alessandra of something that's very similar to what she had, this like Sky, and really can help with this conversation about time. So please launch into this 10 years, 2 years. Space we'll put aside for a bit, because we can argue a little bit about that. But here's time.
Yeah.
2 years apart, 10 years apart.
Well,
yeah.
I think of time, you know, we experience time in a linear way. Every day follows the previous day. And we have this sense that 10 years is a long time, right? Or even 2 years is a long time, but it's all relative, of course. You know, 100 years is much longer than 10 years. And we have synchronicities over that time span as well. So what this model that we were talking about, the music file, that's, you know, music might be, a song might be 5 minutes long, but when you convert it into the frequency domain, it's still the same size file in terms of megabytes, but it's not measured in time, it's measured in frequency bandwidth. So now I've got a bandwidth from anywhere from, you know, 1 hertz cycle per second to, you know, 10,000 hertz. And the size of the file, if I've got a really large file, that means I've got a lot of resolution in that frequency domain. So the larger the file is, the greater the resolution. But it's not about time anymore, it's about frequency. And so if I cut that file in half, and this is like David Bohm's idea of the hologram and cutting a hologram in half. If you cut this frequency domain music in half, you don't actually lose half the song. Because when you convert it back to the time domain to play it on your CD player, it's still 5 minutes long, but it's lost half the frequency resolution. So the quality has degraded by half. So
Yeah.
there's a
So
sense
like
in
a
which,
picture.
like a picture, yeah.
Like a picture. Okay, good.
Well, with a picture, you can cut off, you can sort of put a mask on it, and you can lose a lot of the resolution. You can get a blurry picture, but you don't lose half the picture. You just lose the resolution of the picture.
It's like if a little song is written in a huge song. So it's like everything is already inside. So if you cut in every part of the wall, you find
Yeah, that's
well,
right.
the same thing.
That's right. And you find like,
Okay.
you find the same song, but with different qualities, different
It's
frequencies.
like Leibniz monad. So it's this is
So,
very nice,
so there's,
idea.
you know, the beginning of the file and the end of the file are not different time points, and they're
Yeah.
the time is distributed throughout the system. So in this sense, that the 2 years between when I first met this person and when I met him again at the wedding, in the frequency domain, there's no separateness to those two events, but I'm experiencing them separately because
Okay.
in the space-time representation that we live in, the regular world, those events have to be experienced separately based on the same criteria of special relativity that you were working on in your EPR paper. And the same thing with your 10-year separation. They're not physically separate in time in this other domain.
So
Oh,
you are saying, so what you are saying is that there is not a real difference in time because the time is spread out everywhere. So in some sense that there is not really in the world such a difference between later, before, and something like that. And so,
But we have to experience it that way.
Okay, good. But now I have a question for you. Okay, I have tried to change my story of the bench.
Mhm.
Okay. I have tried to match time. Okay. What if instead of have a difference of 10 years, I had a difference of half of hour? Okay, or 10 days, for example. My mom being photographed in Prague in the same bench, on the same bench, 10 years before me.
Mhm.
Okay. Would it be be still a coincidence, or at least
If it was just half an hour,
a so remarkable coincidence? If the time difference
right.
wasn't like huge like that. So if there was a 10 days difference, for example, if my mom was photographed 10 days before I was photographed. Okay,
Yeah.
That's
so the
interesting.
time is not, there is not a, or let's say 2 hours before. So the time here is almost matching.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Probably it will still be it would be still a coincidence, okay, but not a so coincidental coincidence. It is not so surprising. So we don't say, wow, such a coincidence. Okay.
Well, I think it's different.
I think so here the question is about time, because the more the more we have a difference in time,
Mhm.
the more the coincidence seems remarkable.
Mhm.
Seems seems a wow coincidence. And so there must
That makes
be
sense.
a difference. So we can, I understand your interpretation, your Bohm's interpretation of these of the time, okay, or our feeling of the time. But it seems to me that if we are stretching or so relaxing or pushing so the
Condensing.
time,
Condensing.
yeah, okay, thank you very much. It makes a difference. It makes a difference.
So it seems like
Now
the
our
difference,
feeling,
doesn't the
that
difference have to
coincidence-
be with like the number of factors, of causal factors? Getting to some of the stuff I read in your paper, the causal factors, there are causal factors to coincidences, right? There are cause and effect reasons why a coincidence happens, but there's
especially
no,
in physical kinds of coincidences, in physical kinds,
especially
of
physical
coincidences.
kinds,
Yeah.
but there's not a cause for the coincidence, the meaningful connection itself. It's more about, you know, like if your mother took a picture on that bench a half an hour or 2 hours before you, the coincidence is really the fact that she's also in Prague at the same time as you, right? Because that's pretty strange that she's in Prague at the same time that you're in Prague.
But
Why are you both there?
I still feel it still sounds to me that the original story is much more surprising.
Right. Well, and I'm thinking that might be because there's so many other factors. There's 10 years of choices and decisions and connections that happened in between.
So
which
you don't think that time is the problem here. So.
Well, I do think time is the problem. I think time makes it more special, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But I think that's because at every minute that goes by, more decisions are being made by you and by your mom. And so if you think of the wave function like this tree, and every minute that goes by, it branches into more branches. By the time 10 minutes goes by, there's 15 branches. By the time an hour goes by, there's 100 branches. By the time a year goes by, there's 1,000,000 branches. By the time 10 years go by, there's like 1 billion branches.
Yeah.
So now you're talking
probability
about
to meet is yeah.
So after 10 years, there's 1 billion options, whereas after only 2 hours, there was only 50 options. That increases the amazingness of that synchronicity.
I think when we yeah, that's true. Of course, what are you saying is true, but I think with this kind of coincidences, which are not properly physical, okay, because there is not a matching in space, both in space and time. What is important is the relation in the meaning we have between the events involved in the coincidence. So here, the meaning is really important in both stories, my stories and your story. Okay. Because in my case, in my story, so what is important is the photograph,
right?
The fact that my mom is my mom and she's not another person,
random person.
Yeah. Okay, another person.
I found this photograph in a magazine of a person sitting on the same bench. That would also be a coincidence, but definitely not as much.
Yeah, not as much. Yeah, that's what I am trying to say. So I think the meaning and the relation in the content of the two related events is quite important in this kind of coincidences.
Is meaning
more than time and space? Meaning
is more than time?
Yeah.
Okay, and is meaning subjective or objective?
Subjective. Yes, the relevance also we give to the event is quite important because we pick, we single out particular events and we gave up other events, which are not so important for us.
But that comes back to this question of
psychology here is playing a very yeah.
So we define for ourselves what the meaningfulness is, but that hammer falling on the person's head, you're saying that is not subjective, right?
Yeah, that's not so subjective. So everyone can perceive
But maybe,
can-
so maybe there's an objective,
so
a
even though
subjective
even
aspect.
what? Sorry, I
Well,
didn't
there could be
hear.
a subjective aspect if this
Yeah,
person
also
had a dream.
there are subjective aspects, of course, but they are not so relevant like in the case of non-physical coincidences.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've
Such
come to
as
thinking,
synchronicity or yeah.
we've come to thinking about the meaning, which is so very important in all of this. And meaning is another really a discussion we might have. The two of you want to do that another time, because meaning is very meaningful. What is the meaning of meaning and all that sort of stuff? And I have some ideas about it also. It's very meaningful to talk about. Anyway, I won't go through that too much, but it's a word that we can throw around a lot. But here we want to stay with time as much as possible as we're kind of beginning to get near the end of our discussion, because Sky, your idea of the frequency domain, which Fourier is something that I was trying to understand and be able to make sense out of, and you're making more sense out of it than I had before, and how that might apply this frequency domain to time and coincidences and wholeness, and how you think about wholeness, which had been elusive to me until I heard you talk about your daughter and making the squeaky sound. I think that really helped get me and maybe hopefully other people there. But what I didn't get, Sky, and this is a side question, is I thought the hologram was a perfect representation of the whole, but it isn't. When you break down that frequency domain, you get a blurrier picture, which is not really the way I thought of holograms. So comment on that, and then I want to go back to time.
Well, let me stick with time for a minute, because it's related to the hologram. And so everyone is probably familiar with the feature on an iPhone, or I think it's also on other phones, where you can take a photograph, but it's actually extended by like 3 seconds. So it's called a live photo. And this is, it's not a video. It's not intended to be a video, because it doesn't last long enough to really capture any meaning or any story, but it's longer than just a snapshot. And it's, instead of just taking a photo of me going for the camera, it would capture me going, moving a little bit, and the energy of a human being when they're posing is captured by this 3-second snapshot. So this is a really useful metaphor for the difference in how we can view time. Instead of, like you were saying, Bernie, a grain of sand dropping through an hourglass, which represents the present moment, and we think of time as like this present moment is just a grain of sand. It's a point on a map. Instead, I want to think about time as a line through the map, like an extended moment that not just, if you think about Zeno's paradox is this idea from Greek philosopher Zeno in many thousands of years ago, that if you have an arrow flying through the air, obviously someone shot it with a bow, so it's got motion, and you took a snapshot of that, then if you looked at the snapshot, you would have no idea what the motion is. It could be flying through space, or it could be falling. But you can't tell just from a snapshot, because it doesn't capture any motion. But this live photo does capture motion. So if the basic element of time is a live photo and not just a photograph, then from that live photo, you can see what the motion is. So this is the shift in thinking, going from a point in time to a line through the map of time. And this really changes the way we think about connectivity in time, because the future state of, like, if you look at the song that's 5 minutes long, the beginning and the end of the song are both encoded into the frequency domain as a whole. The whole song exists at once in this alternate domain. And so the whole path through time that we're experiencing exists at once in the frequency domain. So the synchronicity of meeting on the bench 10 years later, taking that photograph, is part of a timeline from 10 years earlier, where a photograph was previously taken. And the connection through that timeline, it can make more sense and have a sort of an a-causal relationship, to use Jung's terminology. There can be a relationship across time, because time is not these separate sand grains, but this extended line.
It's a continuous, kind of a continuous line.
and it's all at
Great.
once. You know, when you step,
It's expanded. Yeah. Yeah, great. And the example of the photo in the iPhone is quite good. I really had a kind of illumination,
Good.
enlightenment. Yeah, so now I got it. Great.
Yeah.
So if time is not discrete, is not made with piece of moment, but it's just a huge, a whole moment, then there is a match in time.
Mm-hmm.
Even in our examples, in the case of your wedding, the wedding of your friend, and the bench example in Prague.
Yeah,
Good.
and you know, various laws like the law of conservation of energy makes it so we can only experience the moment right now, where physics laws happen, you know, in the present. But it's like a window on a film strip. You know, we know that the movie is going to continue. We're just not there yet.
Great. That's really cool. It's the first time I heard something like that, and I hear something like that,
Yes.
and I really like it. I think I'm going to read your book, your article.
Well, so
Yeah.
so you know, like another example, Bernie, that I think the reason it's so important for us to study this stuff that Alessandra and I are studying is because it has relevance to the way that we view the world and socially and in our culture. So if you look at synchronicity as sort of a juxtaposition of events, how do events show up at the same time? You know, in the US, we've got a history, a long legacy of racism. And as you were mentioning earlier, Bernie, in our pre-discussion around where you live and the social tensions. Mm-hmm. And we, you know, not everyone is equally aware of these issues. So, you know, as a white person, I've become more aware only recently of what it's like to be Black in America. And that's because of many of the situations that have been happening. So I noticed the coincidence of juxtaposition of the death of George Floyd, where his last words were, "I can't breathe." And this really expresses, for many Black people I've spoken to, the experience of being oppressed and being held down, not having space to breathe in the society. And at the same time, we're experiencing a pandemic, which is causing people to have trouble breathing. And these are obviously unrelated events, but the emergence of both of these events at the same time in history, I think it gives us an opportunity to step back and look at the meaning and ask, what are these events trying to show me in a metaphorical way, or in a, you know, what can I grow? How can I grow from these experiences? And how can the external synchronicities or coincidences show me where my growth edge is? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And what I'm trying to do is listen to your description of particularly George Floyd and "I can't breathe, I'm suffocated by racism, by oppression." I want to map that on the frequency domain. I want to be able to picture that. So would you help me with that?
Well, these separate events, obviously, each of them having a different causal chain, are part of a single, in the frequency domain, the proper shape, or one of the shapes you can think of as a tree with all these branches, all these possible branches. And I think of the top of the tree as being, you know, the future possibilities, and the bottom of the tree is where we are now. And it's an apple tree. So those apples represent meaningful correlative outcomes, meaningful in the sense that they reflect the values that we are holding and acting upon in the present. So if I'm acting upon, you know, in American society, when we continue to support racist institutions, like housing institutions, for instance, which redline Black Americans, keep them out of housing opportunities, that is highlighting apples on the tree that help to illuminate, like, this is what's going on, so we can identify situations will be likely to emerge which highlight the problems for us. So whether, you know, I think we subconsciously all want greater peace and harmony, even if we don't, you know that. And so we're sort of in the present when we're acting out these dramas of, you know, systemic racism or whatever our drama is in the moment, we're actually identifying branches of the tree in which those dramas unfold in a meaningful way to allow us to see and reflect to us what the psychology is, what the behavior is that we're bringing into the world. So I think the apples represent the reflection of our own behavior to us, and that's how we grow. That's how we change, right? Because we see ourselves reflected by life.
Alessandra?
Yeah, I like Sky's example of the tree, but there is something I am not understanding. So, okay, so the apples are our behaviors, right? Our way to combine events in a coincidental way, right? So what I am not understanding is this. So these apples grow up spontaneously, or we are choosing. We are in some sense giving water, water to the tree in a way that only those particular kinds of apple grew up.
That's right. We are giving water to the apples because they reflect our choices, right?
Okay, so they are our choices. Okay.
So if I choose to ignore racism in society, but then I also engage with privilege by purchasing a home and going on vacation, then I'm choosing apples. I'm identifying. It's really about identifying. I'm identifying apples or branches which enhance that inequity, so that I can actually see it. And the apples themselves are just the targets. They're the outcomes. The synchronicities are earlier. They're the events that happen right now, which are coincidental because only later I see the connection. But they have those apples are like heavy, right? They weigh down the branches to give a greater likelihood of a synchronicity happening.
So coincidences come from our beliefs, our behaviors, and our beliefs. So depends on what we believe and
and they can
on where we come from culturally
and because of that they can reinforce what we believe, right? So if we this is where conspiracies become really difficult to untangle, because if we already believe something to be true, and then we start to see coincidences where that same information keeps coming to us on the internet, especially because Google searches are designed to do that, then we're going to reinforce our beliefs, and then we actually create that reality through the synchronicities that we're sort of generating.
And that can explain very well why we can see coincidences in some things, but we don't see coincidences in other things.
It's selective, right?
And the only, so for example, for me, something can be a coincidence, for you not. It's a kind of subjective coincidence, that is not physical coincidence.
Right.
Can be explained in this way. Yeah, that's good.
And what do you think, Alessandra, about
this is really a philosophy, philosophy system.
Right. Well, that's why I'm wondering for you, like if there's a certain amount of data, but we're only able to see some of the data because we have a filter in our minds, right? So we connect those dots, but we connect it in a certain way. But somebody else. What's that?
Depends on the frequency. We are connected. So if like for the radio station, right? So radio program. So you can hear the songs and the music only for a certain frequency. If you change frequency, you don't hear the same music and the same radio program. So it's the same. So
that makes sense. And because all the data, all those airwaves are there, right?
We can say that we don't have epistemic access to certain frequencies. We have epistemic access to other frequencies.
Epistemic access. So meaning like we don't have knowledge. We can't access the knowledge.
Exactly. exactly, because we are not in the right frequency.
And does that have to do with like our preconceptions and biases, what we were able to perceive?
Also,
observe?
yes, of course. Yeah, it can be. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Misunderstandings or, for example, if you are a judge, okay, and you have to decide to convict a person for killing someone else, okay, you need all of the possible informations, okay, about the fact which happened, and about the person you are judging. The information you have, because you are the judge, is not the same. Your point of view is not the same that I have.
Right.
Okay, if I am one of the lawyers, or just one person listening to this okay, kind of the situation. I think what you are saying is quite interesting, because you are relating psychological stuff, that is epistemic access, that is knowledge,
Right.
with physics.
Right.
Yes. It's like we're
yeah,
being
really appreciate it.
putting together this
That's true. Yeah,
psychology.
I'm really impressed about it.
That's what we're doing here, psychology and physics. And part of the psychology and physics is that we've come to the end of our time together. Yeah, we have to like acknowledge
in the frequency domain or in the regular time
domain. I don't know how to do this in the frequency domain. You're gonna have to be able to tell me. And we'll have another discussion about the holographic blurring, which was a new idea to me, but that would be at another time. So for last words from either one of you or for both of you, please, and then we'll have to sign off.
Go ahead, Alessandra.
So very glad to be here today with you. Just a question, but of course we are leaving it for another discussion. To Sky. Sky, do you think that coincidences are really uncommon events, or they are common? What do you think about it?
I think they're, yeah, that's great. And we'll have to have another conversation.
There's more. It's not as yes or no as you'd
it's
like to
another
present
story.
it. It's provocative, and yeah,
of course.
Of course, that's you. And
nobody has the time to reply to this question.
Well, we don't, that's why you said it that way. So I'm not even going to have anybody try, because I'd get into it too. Sky?
Well, so I think synchronicity has this huge role to play, because it's very common. There's your answer. and you know, I think humans, we approach things in life based on our insecurities, at least at this time in history. You know, we're coming from a period of a lot of insecurity. We have insecurity around our finances, around our well-being, around our planet. And just psychologically, we come at the world like, how do I shore up my security? And I think what synchronicity can do is, if it's common, if it's showing up, if we can expect it, then it can help us deal with that, just that fundamental core sense of, am I going to be okay? Because for some people, of course, in oppressive situations, there is a real threat. But for many of us, we live life in a very safe environment, and yet we feel threatened by life. We feel insecure about it. And synchronicity can play the role of making us look at our goals and say, you know what? I'm okay. How do I want to spend my life? Do I want to go for this job idea, or this career idea, or this relationship that I never thought I could dream of? And it can help us leap into flow and go for our dreams. So I think that's really why I study synchronicity. I think it can then, you know, we can address something like climate change as big as that, because we look and we say, well, we have to start here today to get to there. And that's just a series of choices, all of which can be supported by synchronicity and coincidence along the way.
Well,
that way, the case of the doctor is not so
Well, there are
Right.
there are negative coincidences. I've tried to make a list of some of them to get some idea about them. And as Sky has mentioned, they can be interpreted to fit your conspiracy theory idea, and sometimes conspiracy theories are right and they're picking up stuff, and we're picking up stuff that nobody else wants to believe, like
Right.
coincidences are valuable,
Right.
for example. So they're trying to find out what's real is all of this, what this is about, and how can we maneuver in a way that makes everything better is what we're all interested in. So I want to thank each of you and both of you for a very fun discussion, very enjoyable and informative. I very
Yes.
much appreciated it. So
Thanks for
you.
bringing us together, Bernie.
You.
You're
It's
very
great
welcome.
to meet you, Alessandra.
Nice to meet you too. Very nice.
And I look forward to having another conversation and getting to read more of your work.
Of course. It would be very nice to have another conversation. Yeah.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.